I love a love story, but I kind of love these ones the most. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I am taking you through some of my favorite romance books that I have read throughout my entire life. I have been an unabashed romance reader for as long as I can remember. It's one of my favorite genres to read because it always leaves you feeling a little bit more uplifted by the end of the book. Mainly because at the end of the book, everything just works out, everything falls into place, and that's something that I think we all need right now. With that in mind, I have put together a list of some of my favorite romance books that I have read throughout the years. They are all going to be pretty contemporary romances, so there's not going to be a whole lot of fantasy in here. But if you need a story that's going to uplift you a little bit, one of these is the one to go for. First up is what I classify as what started it all, and that is The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I don't mean that this was the first romance book that I ever read. It's far from it, but this was the first kind of steamier romance book that I had ever read. I read it back in 2020, and it just gave me such a happier feeling than what was happening in the world back then. This is about Olive, whose twin sister Amy has just gotten married, and Amy is one of the luckiest people in the world. If she enters a competition, she gets it. If she goes for a promotion, it's hers. And everything has been falling into place for the wedding except for one thing. For the wedding meal, Amy had won a huge seafood buffet, and there were only two people at the wedding who didn't eat from it. Olive, who is allergic to shellfish, and Ethan, who just didn't want to go for it. What transpires is that this seafood was really bad, and every single person who was at the wedding has gotten a massive bout of food poisoning. Except for Olive and Ethan. This is where shenanigans start, because Amy and Dane's honeymoon is fully booked. It was once again won in a competition, and it is non-refundable and cannot be cancelled. Amy enlists her identical twin sister Olive and the groom's brother Ethan to go and pretend to be the two of them on the honeymoon in Hawaii. The issue is that Olive and Ethan cannot stand each other. This is where I learned about a couple of tropes that I really like. I really like the kind of forced proximity that Ethan and Olive have to go through for the entire thing. I really like the enemies to lovers that kind of thaws out towards the end of this book. And I really love a little bit of spice in my books. This was the first Christina Lauren book that I had ever read, and it was such a great introduction to their writing. I've gone through their entire back catalogue and caught up with everything that they have released since, and Christina Lauren is one of my favourite writing duos at the moment. Another romance book that I enjoyed around the same time was The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. This is, unfortunately, the only book of Sally Thorne's that I have enjoyed so far, so I think that this was kind of just a one-hit wonder for me. This is about Lucy and Josh. They've been working for the same publishing house since a merger a couple of years ago, and at the moment there is a position opened for assistant to the CEO. It's going to be a huge promotion, and it's going to be a great opportunity for the person who gets it. And Lucy and Josh are the forerunners, as when the two companies were previously set up, they were the assistants to the then CEOs. Except there's only one position available, and both of them are going to have to fight it out. Not quite Hunger Games style, but with a little bit of energy to try and oust the other for the position. This one is a little bit controversial. There are a couple of things in here that people don't really like, and I do understand the criticism that it has had. But there were a couple of things in here that I really enjoyed as well. Again, it did have the enemies to lovers trope that I really enjoy. It introduced me to the world of a workplace romance, which it turns out that I am really into. I just really loved the idea of them working in the same place and then constantly trying to one-up one another. But it also had a trope that up until then I hadn't seen in any book at all, and it turns out that that just speaks to me. And that is taking care of somebody when they're sick. As you can hear from my voice, I've got a bit of a cold right now, and I just need somebody to be there who can bring me tea, who can bring me chicken soup, who can make me comfort food, who can wrap me up in blankets and put me on the couch with Gilmore Girls. And when I saw that exact kind of comfort in this book, it just spoke to me. If you're looking for the kind of romance book that's going to rip your heart out, stomp on it, and then try and put it back into your body, then I would suggest that you take a look at The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I adored this book. Now, I did read this during the Amazing Readathon back in 2023, so I do need to go back to it and inhale it in my own time. Because when I was reading it for the Amazing Readathon, and all of the books that I was reading that August, it all just kind of blurred into one another. But this was one of the standout ones. This is about Clementine, who is still grieving the loss of her aunt a couple of months ago, but she has been left her aunt's apartment and she's moved in and got all of her stuff ready. When she comes home from work one evening, she finds a man standing in her front room. This guy is called Ifan, and it turns out that this is also his apartment from 7 years ago. The kind of time space continuum has been snapped in half, and Ifan has turned up in the apartment, and this is the only place that she can see him and interact with him because in their real world, 7 years from now, he has no idea that she exists. I absolutely loved the concept of this. It is very similar to the movie The Lake House starring Sandra Bullock. So if that's the kind of energy that you want for a book, this is definitely the one to go for. It does, however, come with a pretty big trigger warning for suicide, suicidal ideation, and for grief and bereavement. If that's something that you need to protect yourself when you're going in to read this book, do protect yourself and do put yourself first. But if it's something that you are able to read, this is such a tearjerker. You ever try to find a good romance book and then three turn up at the one time? Great. That is what the Brown Sister trilogy by Talia Hibbert is. All three of the books feature one of the Brown sisters. So you've got Get a Life Chloe Brown, Take a Hint Dani Brown, and Act Your Age Eve Brown. What I love about these three books is how representative they are. Each of the three girls has got something going for them, and they've all got their own specific struggles in life. Chloe is suffering from a chronic illness. Dani is going through the motions of a breakup that's not particularly a breakup, but she is also dealing with a kind of a strange fame being thrown upon her. And Eve is kind of wondering if she may be on the autism spectrum. They are all women of colour, they are all plus size, they are all so boisterous and fun, and they are exactly the kind of person that I want to hang out with. I want to be sitting at the kitchen table in the Browns' parents' house and just watching the chaos envelop me. I also love that despite that they are sisters, all three of them feel distinct. They all feel like their own separate person. They all have their own personalities. They all have their own quirks. They all have their own things that make them them. And I absolutely love that. It's one of my favourite series, and I dip back into it now and then, particularly if I'm in a reading slump and I just need something that's going to kick me up again. This is definitely the one to go for. A YA book that's going to speak to the romantic in all of us is The Falling in Love Montage by Kira Smith. This book is about Saoirse, who's kind of worrying about her future at the moment. Her mother has been diagnosed with dementia, and Saoirse is a little bit worried that this is in her future as well, because there is a pretty strong genetic trend to dementia. She's trying to put it out of her mind for the summer so that she can concentrate on the exams that she's got coming up next year. But at a house party, she meets a girl called Ruby. Ruby is an unabashed rom-com connoisseur. She has seen every single rom-com that's ever come out, and she is absolutely in love with the genre. Whereas Saoirse is much more at home, sitting in front of a horror or a slasher. Ruby decides that she is going to try and cheer Saoirse up for the entire summer, and she's going to take her on a montage that will put her favourite rom-coms to shame. They're going to go to theme parks and go on the Ferris wheel. They're going to go on a massive shopping spree. They're going to go for walks in the park by the lake. And all of this is going to help Saoirse see that there is a little bit of joy and that there is a little bit of happiness in life. But it might also make her fall in love with Ruby. I've read a couple of books from Kira Smith before. She hasn't brought anything out in a while, but I've really enjoyed the ones that she's written so far because it's not just focused on the romance. There are also a couple of deeper things that are going on in this book, and a lot of them will speak to the things that a lot of teenagers are going through. And even as a woman in her back then 20s, I was still able to connect with the characters in this book, and I was still able to connect with what was happening in the story. And I just had such a great time living in Ruby's head and experiencing all of the love and all of the fun from all of my favourite rom-com movies. From a super mild lemon and herb to extra, 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 extra hot, I absolutely adored The Roommate by Rosie Danan. I wasn't as in love with The Intimacy Experiment, which is the second book in this duology, but I had such a great time with The Roommate. This is one of the spicier books that I had read when I was discovering how much I loved contemporary romance, and this is one of the ones that was way up there at the top back then. This is about Clara, who has moved right across the country from New England all the way to LA because she's going to be moving in with one of her best friends. She's had a crush on him for years, and she thinks that this is her opportunity to actually make something work between the two of them. It turns out that Greg's band is going on a tour of the country, and he has actually rented out his room on Craigslist. The guy who answered and who got the room is Josh. Josh is an adult entertainer, and this is a world that Clara is completely shut off from. She was brought up in a very well-to-do, very kind of held back society, So when she discovers the sexual freedom that Josh has got and all of the freedom that he has got in his life anyway, she doesn't particularly know what to do with it. Clara and Josh work together and they come up with a couple of ideas that they are going to use to boost his website, which is about promoting safe sex and promoting safer relationships, with one of his co-workers. Naomi, who is Josh's co-worker, was one of my favorite characters in there because she was so ballsy and so fun and vibrant. But I also just really loved the spice in this book. To me, it didn't feel gratuitous in any way. It felt like it was appropriate to the book, particularly because it's talking about adults in the sex industry. But I also felt like it was woven pretty well throughout the entire book. It didn't feel like it was just sex and no plot, and that is something that I look for. I will enjoy a book that's got smut in it, but it also needs to have a plot that's going to anchor me in there. And this had plot in droves. Another trilogy that I have really enjoyed is the Bright Falls trilogy by Ashley Herring Blake. I absolutely adored the world of Bright Falls, and particularly Delilah Green's story. Delilah grew up in the small town of Bright Falls, and she mostly was taken care of by her stepmother Isabel. Isabel also had a daughter named Astrid, and Delilah and Astrid could not be more different. Delilah had actually left Bright Falls when she was older to go and work in New York as a photographer, but she has been struggling financially. Astrid is getting married back in Bright Falls, and she's kind of put an olive branch out. She'd like Delilah to be the photographer for the wedding, come back to Bright Falls for about 2 weeks before the wedding and photograph everything that's going to be happening. All of the events, the bridal parties, the rehearsal dinners, everything that they're going to be doing. Delilah's going to get about $20,000, which is really going to help her out. But she does also have to be back in the company of her stepmother and of her stepsister. While Delilah is there, she also gets reacquainted with Claire. Claire is one of Astrid's best friends. Claire is a single mother, but she's kind of going through the motions with her daughter's father. And Claire and Delilah hit it off instantly. I absolutely love the queer friendliness of this book. There are so many queer characters in here that are just living their joy as themselves, and that is so refreshing to see. I also really love the tight-knit friendship that they've got. It's not just Claire and Astrid, there is also Iris, who is a little bit of a hurricane of her own making, but I absolutely loved just how tight-knit they were, but how welcoming they were to other people in the group. I did admittedly not have a great time with Ashley Herring Blake's Christmas novel, but I'm really hoping that that was just a tiny little blip and that the next book that's going to come out is going to be way back up there at the top. I also really enjoyed When in Rome by Sarah Adams. This is the first of the Rome, Kentucky series, and I've got the other two books waiting for me on my TBR, so I just really need to get to them. This is a book that has got all of the heat, but none of the spice. It's got great chemistry between the two characters, and it just goes to show that you don't need to write a really big steamy book to write phenomenal chemistry and tension between your characters. This is about Amelia Rose, or as she is known to her hundreds of millions of fans across the world, Ray Rose. But fame is really starting to get her down and she just needs an escape. Amelia has always been a huge fan of Audrey Hepburn, so she decides to make her own Roman holiday. Instead of going to Rome in Italy, however, she is going to go to Rome in Kentucky. While she is there, her car breaks down in front of Nathan's house. Nathan is the town's baker, and he has actually just gotten a pie shop left to him by his grandmother, and he's trying to make this work for him because it's not a road that he was expecting to go down. Nathan begrudgingly takes Amelia in and says that she can stay in his spare room until her car is fixed and only until then. But them spending a little bit more time together is really starting to make them like one another. Like I said, there isn't a whole lot of spice in this book, but that does not mean that there isn't phenomenal heat, phenomenal chemistry between the two characters, and I cannot wait to see what the rest of the series has in store for me. One of my favourite romance authors at the moment is Emily Henry. I would read her grocery list, but my all-time favourite book of hers so far is Funny Story. This is about Daphne, whose ex-boyfriend Peter has just gotten into a relationship with his childhood best friend Pedra. They have always had latent feelings for one another, it seems, and this is when they're going to see if there's something that they can take from that. Except that they have broken up two relationships in the process. Not only have they broken up Daphne and Peter's relationship, but Peter was also in a live-in relationship with Miles. Miles now has got an apartment that he can't really afford, and Daphne needs somewhere else to live. So, naturally, the two of them move in together to try and mend each other's broken hearts and to try and just get back on track. Miles Novak is like Nick Miller in a book. I absolutely love him. The fact that when we meet him for the first time, he is absolutely blasting Celine Dion just makes you realize how much of a Nick Miller this guy is. And I absolutely love how Daphne and Miles work together to try and make Peter and Petra think that they are also giving a relationship a try, especially when an invite to Peter and Petra's wedding comes through that the two of them have been invited to, and they decide that they're just really going to mess with their ex-partners' heads. But there is another aspect to this book that I really love. Daphne had moved to the area for Peter. She didn't really know anybody here. She didn't have a job that was keeping her here. She didn't particularly love what she was doing. But she had seen the breakup as a way to escape from it. Now she's kind of trying to put down a couple of roots here. She's trying to make a kind of an effort to be part of the community. And that is something that I really admire watching. I really love watching people bounce back from a breakup. I really love people trying to get their lives back on track when they've had this huge life-shattering moment happen to them. And watching Daphne regain her confidence and find herself in an area that she never expected to be in was so wonderful to see. Like I said, Emily Henry publishes her grocery list. I'm going to read it. I've had such a great time with the books of hers that I've read so far, and I am so ready to see where she brings me next. One of my favourite romance books that I have read in the last couple of years is Roleplay by Kathy Yardley. The reason that I love this book so much is that it focuses on slightly older characters than what I'm usually used to reading. Instead of people who are in their late 20s or early 30s, we've got people who are in their late 40s and early 50s. This is about Maggie and Aidan, or as they are known to one another, Bogwitch and Otter. They meet each other in a kind of a role-playing online game, and they both have a completely different idea as to who each other is. Maggie thinks that Aidan is the same age as her son, who is about 18 or 19, and he has signed his mother up for this chat room game so that she can have a social life and so that she can have people that she's talking to when he goes to college. Aidan thinks that Maggie is in her 80s or so. She's somebody who has just stumbled onto this chat room and doesn't really know what she's doing. When the two of them find out who the other actually is, a really sweet bond starts to form between the two of them. They will log on outside of the specific gaming hours just to have a little run around for themselves, to get on voice chat, to get to know each other a little bit better. And when they finally meet face to face, it's such a wonderful moment. I absolutely loved this depiction of characters who are in their 40s or 50s finding a second chance at love. It's something that I think everybody in the world deserves. You deserve somebody who is going to be there for you, who is going to look out for you, who's going to be on your side. And it was so wonderful to see these characters having that second chance at happiness. I also really loved that we see a little bit of Aidan's previous relationship and the fact that she has now gotten with his own brother. And also that she gets a little bit of a comeuppance later on in the novel. That was one of my favourite scenes that I have read possibly ever. And it was such a wonderful throwback to that whole hold my earrings era that we all lived through. I absolutely loved the heart of this book. I loved the humour of it. I've got a couple of other Kathy Yardley books that I really want to get to in 2025, and hopefully they are going to be joining role-playing right on this list. Those are some of the romance books that have absolutely set my world alight across the years. What is one of your favourite romance books, or have you got a recommendation that might just snake its way onto this list? If you would love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the sparkling hearts emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.